right, so today I have Dillon England joining me on this episode of Real Conspiracies. Dillon, how's it going, man?
Doing great, man. Pumped for this. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, so I always try to ask guests when they come on, what movie would you guys like to, or what movie would you be interested in covering, the occult symbolism and hidden messages and things like that? And I get a lot of suggestions that I've either covered or am planning to cover, because there's definitely some movies that first come to mind. Obviously, things like The Shining come to mind. A lot of people say that. Or what's that other Kubrick film I'm thinking of? Eyes Wide Shut, things like that. A lot of people suggest those, but you suggested Black Sheep, and this has to be the last movie I ever expected to cover on Real Conspiracies. I hadn't seen this movie since I was a kid, and I remember liking it because I'm a huge fan of Tommy Boy. People who know me well know that I can quote Tommy Boy literally from the beginning to the end. It's kind of pathetic. I've watched the movie way too many times.
Yeah,
it's a fantastic movie, but you suggested Black Sheep, and I'm like, what the heck happens in Black Sheep that we're going to cover? And it totally slipped my mind how this movie ended. So yeah, tell me really quickly, like, what made you want to cover Black Sheep? We'll get into all of it, but I just thought that was a fascinating choice.
Yeah, we met, had you on the show, we were talking and obviously following your show, and I was watching Black Sheep with my friends, and then it gets to the point in the movie, and we'll cover more of this later, where there's an assassination attempt and there's some voter fraud and there's all this stuff, and I'm like,
yeah,
this movie was made when? It was made in 1996 or 1994 or something like that. And I'm like, this is prophetic of literally like what we're seeing now. So I just texted you right away. I'm like, bro, you have got to cover this.
It's so crazy that you noticed it, because when you told me, I was like, okay, I got to look up if there's anybody who's covered this from a conspiracy angle, from a January 6th angle, from a Trump assassination attempt angle. And I found one single article from medium.com that compared the ending of Black Sheep to the events of January 6th. And I thought it was fascinating, but it was just that. I couldn't find any TikTok. Like, there's nobody talking about these comparisons. So this is kind of fresh, and I'm glad that you noticed it. I thought maybe you just read that article, but I think I sent that to you for the first time.
Yeah, no, literally, bro. I was just watching the movie, and I was just like, this is wild.
Yeah. Yeah, it's prophetic, really.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good show,
and it's prophetic to something we'll talk about later that happened in 2004. Again, a full 8 years after this movie came out. So let's just get into what the movie is, and we'll just go through all of it from there. So for people who don't know, Black Sheep is a comedy movie that came out in 1996. It was directed by Penelope Spheris, I think, and she directed things like Wayne's World, Little Rascals, The Beverly Hillbillies, not the TV show, but the movie, the comedy center, or the I don't know if it was SNL related, but the comedy movie from the 90s, the remake. Mm-hmm. And it stars Chris Farley and David Spade. It's another buddy comedy with the two of them, kind of like Tommy Boy. And it's about a gubernatorial candidate who hires a wormy special assistant whose only job is to make sure the candidate's well-meaning but incompetent brother doesn't ruin the election. That's according to IMDb. And yeah, I mean, that's essentially what it's about, right? It's like Chris Farley plays Mike Donnelly. He's Al Donnelly's brother. Al Donnelly's running against the current governor, Tracy, and he's just a screw up. Like, it starts off with him driving a campaign van, and just everything goes wrong. He crashes it into a marquee. Like, all this, hilarity ensues. But does you think that sums up basically what it's about pretty well?
Yeah, he's a funny, well-meaning kid that just can't do anything right, and all he wants in the world is to help his brother out.
Yeah,
he's the most selfless, incompetent, loving,
lovable idiot. Yeah, exactly.
Right, his only goal in life is to help his brother, and the more he tries to help, the more he hurts him.
Yeah,
and that's kind of the premise, and it's built with comedy. There's a lot of fun things that happen in the movie, but that's really the premise.
Yeah.
Of that film.
And then, like in Tommy Boy, they're like, well, we need someone to babysit, baby Huey, essentially. Yes. And they get David Spade's character to kind of fill in the same role that he did in Tommy Boy, where they're on the road together and he's babysitting him. And now he's babysitting him to keep him out of trouble, to avoid the press making a big deal about Mike Donnelly. And this movie is interesting. It had a weird reception. It cost, I couldn't find any official source telling how much the production of this movie cost. I found one source that said roughly $10 million. I have no idea how true that is. Usually it's listed on Wikipedia and IMDb and stuff like that. But it made $32 million at the box office, so it was a success, at least in that. Oddly enough, this movie did about as well as Tommy Boy. So it had a better opening weekend than Tommy Boy. It didn't do as well in the long run, but it was close. They were both in the 30 million between 30 and $40 million range at the box office. And when Tommy Boy came out, they basically just did not promote the film. Like, nobody really knew about it. It didn't do as well as it should. It became a huge success, a cult classic. I mean, I think it's everybody's favorite Chris Farley movie. I mean, would you agree that it's probably Chris Farley's best movie, Tommy Boy?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing about Tommy Boy that I enjoyed more than Black Sheep is there's a character arc to Tommy Boy.
Exactly.
He's actually improving. He's getting better. He's growing. And it's one of those films that you watch and it's a really well-made film.
Yeah.
Even if you're not a Chris Farley fan, it's just a good movie to watch.
It's a road comedy, a buddy comedy. I mean, it's got everything, and you're right, it has a character arc. In this movie, there's parts where, depending on who you read, it's like either they forgot to film something, or I think more likely is that Penelope Spheris didn't like what happened, so they just like overdubbed language in between scenes that gave away like huge plot. Like that whole scene where Chris Farley is drinking and smoking with those teenagers. All of a sudden, you just hear, like, the scene cuts away, but you hear him say, this is horse shit or something like that, and he smashes a bottle, and they like cut out this whole part that he's actually giving a anti-drug speech that looks, originally like it's taken out of context, but it's edited so poorly at times, where there's huge plot points that are just given in like an after, post-production voiceover. So there's a lot of weird things like that going on. It definitely felt unfinished. Rotten Tomatoes gives this approval rating of 30%.
Well, that's low.
It's really low. I was surprised reading online how much this film is hated. Like, it's got a cult following. I loved it as a kid. It's definitely not Tommy Boy.
No, but I think it's funny. I think it's a good comedic film. It's a funny movie.
Yeah. I mean, Chris Farley and David Spade are just so good together, even with all of the stuff that made this movie not successful. It's still fun. Like, I still enjoyed watching it in 2024 almost as much as I did in 1996, 1997.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah. So they gave their site's consensus, Rotten Tomatoes site's consensus says Chris Farley and David Spade reunite to diminishing returns in Black Sheep, a comedic retread. I thought it said retard. A comedic.
I mean, it does.
I'm reading my notes here. I was like, does that say retarded? A comedic retread that succumbs to a woolly plot and sophomoric jokes. Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert gave this film two big thumbs down, two very big thumbs way down. And Siskel admitted that Black Sheep was one of the only movies that he ever walked out on. So not a lot of love from the critics. But audiences
on that one.
Yeah, I disagree. I mean, look, again, it's not his best, but it's still enjoyable. Audiences surveyed on CinemaScore give this a B+.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, that might be a little high. Like, it's not the best film ever, but I still enjoy it.
Yeah. It's a slapstick. It's just a good slapstick movie. Although I will, man, I'm pumped. I want to get to the fun stuff, because the people that haven't seen this movie, it's a fun slapstick, and then all of a sudden, man, we're about ready to show them. They're going to be like, holy.
I want to get into all the slapstick and all the fun stuff. I want to bring up one thing really quickly before we get into like everything in the film, and that is to go along with this kind of poor reception that it's gotten and this poor image that it's been given over the years. Like, in a lot of ways, this was a cursed film. At least that's kind of the theory on it. Farley was set to star in Cable Guy and Kingpin the year that this was made. And he had to basically cancel both of those movies. I think Cable Guy was definitely like the big one that he really wanted to be in, which he was eventually replaced by Jim Carrey. And he had a two-movie contract with Paramount Pictures, and that was where he did Tommy Boy with. And they wanted another buddy comedy with him and Spade after the success of Tommy Boy. So he's kind of locked into this contract, and he's trying to get out of it any way that he can. There's a lot of stories about this, about how he basically was like, look, I don't want to do this movie. Can we cancel it? And, whoever was in charge of that decision would not let him out of it. So eventually they hired SNL's head writer, Fred Wolf, who was the guy who basically came in towards the end of Tommy Boy, or towards the end of pre-production in Tommy Boy, or during production, to rewrite a lot of the script and help punch it up and make it funnier and make it the movie what it is. So a lot of people credit Fred Wolf with the comedic genius behind Tommy Boy. So they hire him again. They get the buddy comedy thing going again. But Farley wanted out of this movie so bad that nobody really thought it was going to get made. So Fred Wolf didn't work on this script until 3 days before the script was due. And basically Paramount calls him up and says, if you don't have a finished script by Sunday, we're going to sue you. So Fred Wolf writes a 45-page script over the course of like 2 or 3 days, turns it in. They liked it. You know, they thought it was great, but they ended up hiring this director, Penelope Spheris, because she did Wayne's World. So she'd worked with Chris Farley before. Wayne's World was the most successful SNL movie to date, and they thought this would be great. But then David Spade later said in an interview, I mean, a lot of the blame, I think, gets put on Penelope for this, and I kind of agree with it. But he said that, this is a quote from an interview, he says, Penelope told us right off the bat that she didn't love Tommy Boy and that she knew how to make Chris and me more funny. That's where someone should have pulled the plug. She then ripped 40 pages out of the script and said she would fix them with her own writer. Fred and her had a few bad meetings, and he was essentially kicked off the project from then on. So she literally fired Fred Wolf 3 different times. Chris Farley and David Spade kept getting her to rehire him. By the third time she fires him, he's kicked off the set. He's not allowed back at all.
Wow.
So, I mean, I have to agree with David Spade here, though. If you're coming into a movie in 1996 and saying, yeah, Tommy Boy sucked, I want to not make that movie. Like, you know, this movie she's going to make is not going to be
terrible. Yeah. I mean, that was Chris Farley and David Spade's like height at that point. I mean, like, it was just such a good film. And if you have a director coming in there being like, I hated your best work.
Right.
That's not an ideal way to keep going and working with that crew. Again, you're just going to lose respect from them too.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, this is also when Chris Farley was addicted to some drugs and he had some other issues.
Well, interestingly enough, though, this is actually when he was sober. That was actually what I was going to talk about next. Is he was sober for 18 months by the time they finished filming this film. He had actually taken time during this film. He would ask the director to leave early from set to go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Like, he was doing really well. Like, this was the height of his career, and it was, you know, he'd already been in rehab like 3 times previous, right? So like, there's no secret that Chris Farley's addicted to drugs and alcohol and stuff like that. But this was
during the filming of Black Sheep.
Yeah, this was when he was sober.
Boy? Oh, Black Sheep. Okay.
Black Sheep. Yeah. Well, 18 months. I don't know when Tommy Boy was filmed. I think he must have gotten sober after Tommy Boy. There's a lot of stories about how Tommy Boy's set was kind of wild and crazy, and Chris was like, you know, wild and crazy because he was. I mean, he idolized John Belushi, who was also wild and crazy and died of a drug overdose. So, but yeah, this movie had a lot of trouble on set. Spade kept saying that he wanted more time with Farley. He believed that that's what made Tommy Boy work. And Spheris didn't think Spade was funny at all. Like, she literally said in an interview, I don't think I've ever smiled at anything David Spade has ever done. Which, again, it's like, I don't like Tommy Boy. I don't like David Spade. I want to direct this movie where it's a buddy. It's just like
corporate, stupid, out of touch hires, man. I feel like this is like Disney right now. Like, you have always these companies that just destroy, like, seemingly just make the worst hires. And you're just like, what are you guys doing?
I mean, so much of what I've watched recently from Disney specifically feels like the person who directed it hates the fan base.
Yeah. Right.
Like, if anybody saw the Borderlands movie, I'm convinced that Eli Roth actually hates Borderlands and hates Borderlands
any
fans.
Star Wars film.
Yeah, true. Well, I mean, they even say it, right? Is I can't remember the name of the director of The Acolyte, but she was like, yeah, I hate Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like, this is, I don't understand a business decision of, let's hand this intellectual property to someone who hates it.
Yeah.
That's going to work out somehow.
And they want to spin it to make it their own thing. It's like, have you seen South Park's Kathleen Kennedy? Like, it's hilarious.
Is Kathleen Kennedy the one that directed Star Wars Acolyte or something?
No, Kathleen Kennedy is like the director of Disney movie, like Star Wars.
Oh, right.
Like,
yeah,
she's
yeah.
like the head honcho for Star Wars and films now. And there's I'll show you the clip later, but there's basically like Kathleen Kennedy's in the office, and it's like a South Park edited clip. And then the whole time she's just like, they're like, we think we need to do this with Star Wars. She's like, no, you need to make it gay. Make it gay. And the whole time she's like, you need to make it gay. And that's really what they've done for Star Wars. So
basically, yeah.
It's hilarious. Yeah. Anyway, back to Black Sheep.
Yeah. So meanwhile, you know, during the filming of this, Chris Farley's upset he doesn't get Cable Guy, and he's arguing that he wants to do more dramatic stuff. He's kind of tired of doing what he called fatty falls down humor. And there starts to get this growing rift between Spade and Farley, you know, because of all this craziness on set. So all these things ended up leading to a movie that no one who worked on it was happy with. It did end up gaining a cult following. People like you and me like it. Everybody I've talked to, like every normal person I've talked to like it. The internet seems to hate it, but every normal person I've talked to likes this movie. Nobody thinks it's as good as Tommy Boy. Like, that's just obvious. but it's still comedy. Chris Farley, though, he hated this film, and probably because of everything that I've mentioned that was going on behind the scenes and how it wasn't as good as Tommy Boy, and he wanted to do better, and he wanted to do Cable Guy and things like that. So he was so upset when he went to the screening of this film, the night of the screening, that this is when he lost a year and a half worth of sobriety. He got drunk, he trashed his hotel room, cost $3,000 worth of damage, and this would end up leading to his 5th stint in rehab. So I think I said 3 before. He had 4 stints before he got sober. This led to his 5th stint in rehab, and this led to his eventual death in 1997 at the age of 33. And normally in this show, we're talking, normally the show is a lot more like occult symbolism and numbers and numerology. So like 33 jumps out. I was just curious enough to see if like anybody believed that Chris Farley was, like sacrificed or killed or some kind of Hollywood thing. I don't think anybody thinks that. I mean, it was pretty clear his downfall, his trajectory, but dies at the age of 33, which is weird. It's not as weird as 27. I don't know if you've heard of the 27 Club. Mm-mm. Like Kurt Cobain and Jimi Hendrix and Amy Winehouse, a lot of celebrities, musicians specifically, who die at the age of 27.
Weird.
Anyway, so he dies at the age of 33 due to an overdose of a combination of cocaine and morphine. I think they call it a speedball. So
nice.
It's a whole story there. So a lot of people blame this movie for Chris Farley's death. So I just want to bring up that theory to start off with, that this was a cursed film. But it's also a prophetic film in a lot of ways. So let's get into the film. What happens? What's your favorite moments? And then we'll get into the voter fraud and all that stuff. And if I haven't said spoiler warning, I guess this is the place to say I'm going to spoil the crap out of this movie. Go watch it. It's fun. Yeah. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube, it probably won't stay up on YouTube because of what we're about to talk about. So definitely follow on Rumble and things like that. But yeah, let's talk about the movie, man. It starts off, like you said, with the van scene. Chris Farley works for a rec center. He helps kids in his community, and he's trying to help his brother Al Donnelly win. So where do you want to go from there?
Yeah, I mean, the rec center is his life. Like everything about that center is what he loves, and he keeps a couple misfortunate events. His brother is like, no, his older brother Al is like, no, I love my brother. And you always have that little snake that's, trying to ruin things. So his brother has his advisor, and his advisor saying, you got to get rid of your brother. You got to get rid of your brother. So that's kind of the tension point the whole time, is you have the advisor trying to get rid of, Chris Farley's character. And then the brother is the compassionate, loving brother, still trying to win the election despite his brother's.
I mean, he's a politician with a heart of gold, if you think about it, because Mike could very clearly make Al lose this election, but he still loves his brother enough where he's really debating. He's like, I know I probably need to keep him out of the spotlight right now, but I also I know he wants to help. I know he wants to help me win. And it's interesting because I think in a lot of cases they do this, and they did this in this movie as well. They don't tell the political parties for obvious reasons, because people will just read their own political party into the hero and the other political party into the bad guy. So it doesn't make it clear one way or the other who's who. I mean, I always this is just me, but I remember when because we live in Michigan, when Granholm got elected, the first thing I thought of was that's Governor Tracy from Black Sheep.
That's hilarious.
That's at least what she always reminded me of. So,
well, that's what Whitmer reminded me of too when I'm watching the film. It was just because it's just a female governor,
Yeah, but I think looks wise though, at least.
Oh yeah.
A little bit closer funny. With Granholm.
100%.
Yeah,
that's really funny. Yeah, and then really the tipping point of the movie was you don't know who, why, or what at this point in the film. And again, pause this, go watch it, come back, because we're about ready to really jump into some of the spoilers now. But he has the rec center. He gets framed. Someone sets it on fire. Then they take pictures of him in front of it, of him trying to stomp out the fire. And that was kind of the last straw that made his brother say, okay, we have got to take care of my brother. And so that's when David Spade. Yeah,
David Spade plays Steve Dodds, and his job, again, it's just like in Tommy Boy, it's watch over him. But in this case, instead of going out on the road and helping him sell brake pads, it's take him up into the mountains and, campaign in a county of like 1,500 people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They pretty much stapled brochures to every tree.
I love that part. Yeah, he's just literally in the middle of the woods, just stapling brochures to every single tree, standing up, shouting, vote for Al Donnelly.
Yeah. And then there's this thread of scenes that you're like, what could go wrong in a house that's so secluded? And then there's a 5-minute section where everything's going wrong, from the roof getting blown off to
The bat scene.
The bats.
It definitely reminded me. Have you ever seen the movie? What is it? The Great Outdoors with John Candy?
No.
Oh man. So like Chris Farley is kind of in a lot of people's minds, and mine included, the funny fat guy who replaces John Candy. You know what I mean? And
Gotcha.
I'm a huge John Candy fan. And in The Great Outdoors, there's a lot of that type of humor. They're in a cabin in the woods and there's a bear, and I can't remember if there's a bat scene because it's been a long time since I've seen it, but I think there is. So
funny.
yeah, a lot of the similar type comedy for sure.
Yeah. It's comedy gold, man. That whole section of them, just them two, which is just so funny because the director says that David Spade isn't funny in her opinion. Like that whole stretch of the bat scene going into David Spade trying to make a phone call and then dropping the phone off the cliff and
getting attacked by the hillbillies with a fire extinguisher.
Yeah, it's good. It was a really funny little section there.
But that's what I find hilarious is everybody's favorite part of the movie, and everything that I remember from a child really comes down to those scenes in the woods, the scenes where it is David Spade and Chris Farley. Like that is the comedy gold of the movie, and that's the part that the director hated. And we kind of don't get as much as we like.
Boy, right? People, when they think of Tommy Boy, they think of them on the road. They think of just funny things that have happened when they're selling, brake pads. And there's a little bit more depth to Tommy Boy and other scenes for sure. But it's just wild that this director just the winning ingredient of Tommy Boy. She's like, I don't want that. That's just wild to me.
Which is weird because she's as much as she hates David Spade, she went on to direct him in another movie following this. Senseless, which was a terrible movie as far as I remember.
I'm sensing a theme with this woman. Apparently she's just not a very good director.
It's so weird because again, like Wayne's World, I think Wayne's World is great, but yeah, I don't know.
Beginner's luck.
I guess. Yeah. So that happened. I think outside of the cabin scenes, which are great, including the boulder hitting the cabin and all that stuff. I think my favorite other part of the movie is probably when he starts realizing that he's being kept out of the loop and he wants to get a hold of his brother and he's not allowed to. And he kind of, Chris Farley's character fights back against this and tries to go to a vote, rock the vote or something like that. Rock the vote thing. And you've got Mudhoney playing, which is like, the height of Mudhoney's career. Nobody remembers him after this. And that whole scene is the other scene that I remember the most is he gets stoned with these Rastafarians. They're talking about how, the black man's being kept on by the white man. He goes out stoned, gives this speech.
And the beginning of the speech is incredible because at first he's like, what, like the crowd loves him. And he looks off to the side. And you have the group of the black dudes that he was just hanging with. They're like cheering him on. Yeah. And then he says,
he's like, I've got a dream. He's like all these slogans and ends it with kill Whitey.
Yeah. He's just like, and then it just stops. Just, you could hear a pin drop. And the black people are like, don't say that.
No, don't say that.
It was so funny.
Yeah. That is probably my other favorite scene. So during this whole thing, you've got all this comedy going on, and then in the background is the campaign. The campaign is in the forefront, the beginning and the end of the movie, but the middle is really just that buddy comedy stuff. And this is where those pictures kind of come back into play. So you've got this guy who took pictures of these two men burning down the rec center. And he basically comes to Governor Tracy and he's like, look, I can either release to the press the pictures of your guys burning down the rec center, or I can release the pictures of Chris Farley trying to stomp out the fire, which makes it look like he burnt down the rec center. Yeah. And he's got he got away because his best friend is the cop in Buckley, I think is the town that he lives in, and kind of is like, I didn't see you, get out of here. So at this point, nobody's linked him to that fire, but we're starting to get to this point where basically, depending on how they manipulate the media is going to be how this campaign goes and who's going to pay the most money to manipulate the media in their way, which I find interesting. Ironic. Yeah. I mean, I think that's true of a lot of media. I think it's like, whose side are we hearing? What side are we? I mean, we still have people that think that Trump said neo-Nazis are very fine people, even though all you have to do is watch the whole clip. But it doesn't matter because if you play the clip out of context on the news, enough people have only heard it that way. This
is when the film gets even more wild, like as this is starting to happen, and for plot to, if we can't tell, Governor Tracy's the bad one. In case we haven't made that very clear, she is the one that caused the fire. She has been just been a bunch of different things. We also need to mention that crazy general guy, the crazy army
Savage.
Yes.
Yeah.
He becomes important later here.
Yeah, I can't remember his first name, but Savage. He's this crazy. why am I blanking on the guy? Gary Busey. Gary Busey is this crazy like ex, Marine or something like that.
Navy SEAL,
Navy SEAL, who knows? He's some ex-military guy, and he's just crazy. He's got like this fake leg, and he's PTSD, and he lives in a bus in the woods surrounded by landmines. And David Spade's first run-in with him, almost ends in David Spade getting killed. They end up stumbling onto his bus, I guess, his like bunker in the middle of the woods. When they're looking for a TV to like watch for updates.
Yeah.
And they kind of become friends, which is really funny. But I love Gary Busey in this film. Yeah. I think Gary Busey's hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely. Hilarious character. Very funny.
I don't think that Gary Busey was sober back then. I think he was the one on drugs back then. He's since changed a lot, though. I think he became a Christian, changed his life, got sober, things like that. I know he did some like Christian films back in the day after his sobriety. So I don't know what he's been up to anymore, but
should look into it.
Yeah, Gary Busey, very interesting guy. Savage, yeah. So they basically in the woods in whatever county they're in, I forget what it's called. You've got Mike Donnelly, Steve Dodds, and Savage. And so during this whole thing, we're wrapping up the election, and ends up that Governor Tracy, who's running for re-election, pays for the photos. They leak the photos, and this is the October surprise. This is what changes the election, ultimately decides who wins the election, supposedly because she wins. And as they're watching, this reminds me so much of a certain election in a certain year. As they're watching the election results roll in, this is where things get interesting because they're tallying up the votes, and the county that they're in, which is Garfield County, I have it in my notes here. They say that there are 1,882 votes. And obviously, Mike Donnelly, who is obsessed with helping his brother win, who knows all of the facts, he's like, hold on, we're campaigning in this county. We know what's going on here. There are only 1,502 registered voters in this entire county. And this is where things get a little weird. It's not quite as weird as stopping the election at 10 p.m., stopping counting votes at 10 p.m., which has never happened before, and then a bunch of ballots rolling in coolers at 3 a.m. and boarding things up. And it's not quite that weird, but it definitely reminded me of 2020, staying up at night going like, what the heck is going on? Why was Trump leading by this huge number, and then when they're not counting, he's losing by an even bigger number? Like, what's up with that? So... sorry. Like I said, this one's going to get banned from YouTube, I'm sure.
Are we trying to keep it up on YouTube?
No, I'm not worried about it. Don't worry about it. Yeah, say whatever you want, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, so to paint this scene, he breaks into this thing.
Yeah.
That he go because he
the Hall of Records.
He's a little. He's just like quirky. You could say he's maybe autistic. You could say whatever, but he knows everything about anything to help his brother. Like just to paint the picture of this film, he is just. His life addiction is helping his brother. And so he knows everything to know about their county. He knows everything to know about everything. And so you're right. So he knows that what he needs to do. So he breaks into this voter thing, and this is where, in this film, guys, it is scary wild to me. This is the first section. He's going through and he sees that there's a discrepancy of voters of like 300 that you mentioned, or 700 or whatever it was. And then they had dead people voting.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, my aunt or uncle or whatever voted here, and he hasn't been alive and whatever. And that's when, to me, I was like, oh my goodness, this film is wild, because you literally have a film from 1994,
1996, but yeah,
1996,
yep,
having a party using dead people to vote to get them in, and I'm like, this sounds eerily familiar to a thing that we had happened in our country recently.
Yeah, and not only does it sound familiar to that, but this might sound even more familiar to residents of Washington State, where this movie takes place, because in 2004, there was this crazy gubernatorial campaign, and it lines up so weirdly with Black Sheep. And we'll come back to the 2020 stuff, but you got to hear this, dude. So in 2004, Washington State, there's a male and female candidate running against each other, Dino Rossi and Christina Gregory, and both elections in the movie and in 2004 real election were marred by accusations of deceased voters on the part of the female candidate. So check out this article from SeattlePI.com. It says, dead voted in governor's race. So let me zoom up on this real quick. says at least 8 people who died well before the November general election were credited with voting in King County, raising new questions about the integrity of the vote total in the narrow governor's race, the Seattle Post intelligence reviewer has found. The evidence of votes from dead people is the latest example of flaws in an election already rocked by misplaced votes and allegations that there were thousands more votes counted than actual voters. Wow. County officials say that the investigating the case pointed out by the PI, these are not indications of fraud. Fraud is a concerted effort, yada, yada, yada. But either way, they found all these dead voters, right? Like this is documented fact. And it gets even crazier because there's a total of the dead voters is actually like what they proved about dead voters is actually the least bad thing that happened this election. Right. By the end, they only totaled 19 dead voters that voted in this election. But there was also 6 illegal double votes, 647 felons that voted, and a huge number of votes that were counted improperly, resulting in at least 1,678 illegal votes counted. This is an election that was decided by less than 300 votes. So 1,600 illegal votes is bad enough. Both elections in this movie and in 2004 were overturned from the original winner. So the initial count the week after the election found that Rossi was leading Gregory by 261 votes until King County discovered 561 absentee ballots that were wrongly rejected, which led them to find a slew of other discoveries, including a bunch of votes being stuffed underneath trays. Like literally the people who were counting the votes are like, yep, this one's for this person. They're like stuffing them under. So those got discovered. And this election was such a mess. It went before the Supreme Court. It wasn't decided who even won for 6 months. And by the end of it, Gregory won with 1,373,361 against Rossi's 1,373,228. It was that close.
Wow.
It was within 200 votes by the end. And the Republican Rossi was like, okay, I did win. Now I lost. But nobody trusts this election, right? Nobody trusted the election. And he wanted a complete revote. But in the state of Washington, there was no provision for a revote, even though, again, this thing was going to courts, Supreme Court. You know, what do we have here? Dead voters, illegal voters, felon voters, people taking ballots and just throwing them out. Like it had everything. It had literally everything. And what's different about this is it was kind of on both sides. Like there was like tampering happening in both directions.
It's like whoever's more guilty, that's who gets in trouble. Like you just can't you can do illegal things. You just can't do the one that like
is more, more illegal than the other guy's illegal things. But I just found that so interesting because, again, this is 8 years before, so it's kind of prophetic in what happened in the state that it's based in. Very similar sounding thing. And to kind of bring it back to the 2020 election, what was similar about 2020 and this 2004 election is in King County, I think it was 60% of that county ended up voting absentee because they were trying this new thing called mail-in ballots, right? And I think King County's really rural, so people didn't want to drive all that way to a voting center, yada, yada, yada. So they started testing out this early mail-in voting thing for people who were not disabled or vets or whatever. And we got a lot of election fraud. And then in 2020, we're all, locked into our homes and it's not safe to go out and we need to mail in vote. And even Barack Obama, before this election had said that mail-in voting would be rife with voter fraud. Now you can't say that voter fraud has ever occurred ever, except when it did in 2004 and when Nixon, you can say Nixon did it, back in the day. Like those things are fine, but we did have at least one election in this country that was free and fair and untouched and unmarred by any voter fraud.
Yeah.
Heavy sarcasm.
He was touched the most by voter fraud.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you have anything else to say about this movie comparing it to like 2020 as far as that goes? Because I want to talk about something that's happening now. This episode's going to be released on Election Day 2024. And there's something that's definitely happening in the 2024 election I want to get to. But
let's do it.
All right. So we're both from Michigan. And one of the stories that's been making the rounds, I think I was on Chris Boyle last week, and he even brought it up before I came on for my guest spot, is that there are a ton of dead voters in our state of Michigan who are not being taken off of the voter registration. No good reason for it. I've read Jocelyn, what's her name? Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State here's answers to it. She's like, look, we're taking them off, but we're just not taking them all off, you know? So let's look at the facts of this one here. This is the first thing I saw, and it compares the Michigan Voter Information Center, and it gives the address right there, and it tells you how many voters are registered in the state of Michigan. And according to the Michigan state government, there are 8.4 million registered voters. But according to also the state of Michigan, there are only 7.9 million people in the state of Michigan above the age of 18. So there's 510,000 more registered voters in Michigan than there are adults.
That's a problem.
It is a problem. And again, both of those are sourced by the state of Michigan. And if you look into this, Elon Musk noticed this and said Michigan has more registered voters than eligible citizens. Is that true? And he tags Community Notes. And he's going off of this post here, which is saying the same thing. There are 8.1 million registered voters. There's hundreds of thousands more registered voters than adults. And if you come down to Community Notes, and they source this from the Michigan State websites, the federalregister.gov, bridgemi.com, it says, yes, Michigan had 7.9 million voting age citizens, according to latest Census Bureau data, yet they have 8.3 million registered voters. But it's okay because the 606,000 inactive voters are going to be removed by 2027. So at least, 3 years after the election that this matters. Yeah. Well, because we got to get through this election and then the governor election, which is in 2026. Right. So then after that, then we can remove the dead voters from the registration. It's just wild.
I mean, it makes sense in Michigan. So, a year and a half ago, you had Whitmer versus John James.
Right.
John James was a black conservative, Whitmer being a white Democrat woman. And she was also the one in charge during COVID. She was the one that shut down Michigan, destroyed businesses. Just not like, you want to talk about that Trump voters are Nazi. You should have lived in Michigan during COVID times.
It was pretty bad here
that they put in place. And so
people got arrested for fishing on docks by themselves.
Unless it was her husband, and then he could go do that. But that's a story that we can talk about later. But it's just interesting to me because I thought that the way that she handled COVID was just so harmful for a lot of us that own businesses that I thought for sure John James, especially Detroit, a lot of black demographic, I thought that he was going to be able to win that off that play as well. And he's a great dude, like good speaker, honest guy. I thought for sure. And she won again. And I've never understood. Now, it could just be still that people just will vote for their party regardless of if it's killing them. But this this at least adds a little bit of a,
Well, it adds a big after you realize that Wayne County was one of the most scrutinized counties in the 2020 election, because that is the county where not only did they shut down counting and then kick all the Republican watchers out, then they boarded up the windows and we're bringing in. Yeah, is wild, dude. Do you want to talk about that? I mean,
I can real quick. I mean, my wife was there in Detroit, in Cobo Hall. For all these stories, she saw it happen. Republicans went out for lunch. They locked the doors, did not let the Republicans back in. Also on the counting tables, and this is like 4 years ago. And so if I get any of the story wrong, I'm sorry. Like, this is from what I remember because it's been a while. There were tables, and there's supposed to be 3 people at each counting table, right? So you're supposed to have a Republican, you're supposed to have a Democrat, and you're supposed to have someone watching. So you're supposed to have one from each party and then a watcher to kind of make sure both of them aren't screwing up with the counting of the ballots and everything like that. There would be tables with 3 Democrats.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
There would be tables with 0 Republicans. So then they go leave, they lock the door. Then the Republicans are trying to get back in to do their job. So they're banging on the door. And then the Democrats are saying that the Republicans are being violent. So they call the cops.
Yeah.
So the cops show up and you're like, you can't go in there. The Republicans are like, well, we need to be in there because this is our job. And then there's a bunch of yelling, hostility. The Democrats are kicking the Republicans out. I mean, it was wild. And you're not allowed to have your phones in there.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I don't know any of this is happening until my wife calls me and she's like, we left because like it was getting really bad because you have the Democrats that are literally cheating, whether or not the people, this is what I say, whether or not they were cheating. When you put yourselves in those situations where you you are doing everything to make it look like you are cheating,
right,
you probably are.
You probably are.
And so it was just getting so bad that Republicans are like, we have got to like get in here to stop them from cheating. And it just became so interesting that Wayne County was so pivotal on a lot of votes that weren't legit. And my wife posted this just story when she was walking out of Cobo Hall, and it went viral. You had like DC Drano reaching out, you had news articles reaching out, and then our house was getting doxxed.
That's wild, dude.
And I had to go on Anna's Instagram, and we had to take off all pictures of our home. And I stayed up the whole night because I was legitimately like, we were getting, like, she was getting messages from people. It was just for reporting what happened. She's like, this is just my experience. So it was just a wild thing. And this was before PJ, we heard anything about dead voters in Georgia. This was just like, as it was happening. And then next thing you know, you have all of the weird stuff. And that's why I've been so convinced there was massive cheating that happened in the 2020 election, because my wife experienced it and we saw it happen before it became mainstream news. And we thought maybe it was just Detroit, and then it just happened that this wasn't. It was just everywhere.
I think at this point, it's like the preponderance of evidence is that there clearly was a bunch of cheating. I mean, you could look at it from a bunch of different ways. Dinesh D'Souza's documentary, hey, let everybody go home, we're not counting, and then pulling out boxes in Georgia, which we have on camera. Wayne County, what you just described, all the illegal voting that happened in Nevada. Like, there's just so many examples. Arizona was another big one. Yep. There's just so many freaking examples at this point. Like, I think every election, a bunch of cheating goes on, obviously. Sure. But like, we can't, I think you kind of got to be blind at this point to not see that a huge amount of cheating happened in 2020. And it seemed to sway some pretty important states.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wild.
It is pretty wild. So this movie was definitely kind of prophetic in that way. It was, I mean, it's not that voter fraud hasn't happened historically before. Sure. But when you add the dead voter stuff that's happening, again, it links to 2004 in Washington. It seems to be what's happening in Michigan. I just want to bring up one more thing on Michigan really quick, because I saw this article from heritage.org, and it says that in September of 2020, the Public Interest Legal Foundation sent Jocelyn Benson, who's the Secretary of State here, a list of deceased registrants who remained on the state voter rolls less than 2 months before the presidential election. Of those nearly 26,000 Michigan residents, 23,663 had been dead for at least 5 years, and 17,479 had been dead for at least a decade. And astonishingly, 3,956 have been dead for at least 2 decades, and they were still registered to vote in this state. So we had at least that many back in 2020. Seems like they're not working that hard at getting them gone for 2024 or again for the gubernatorial race in 2026. I would think that that's kind of fishy. And her answers are consistently, well, we are doing something. We are removing them. We're going to remove them. And it's like, yet she fought kind of tooth and nail to keep these people on the voter rolls. She actually turned down a motion to throw... or the federal courts turned down a motion that she put forward to throw out the lawsuit against having all these people on the voter rolls still.
Yeah,
so
and on top
fighting
of that,
against, like, why would you fight against having dead people on? Why would, it doesn't make any sense.
I mean, unless you were cheating, right? Why would you fight against this? Right. And then on top of that, Michigan, a week or two, or maybe it's been a month ago now, they said that they're not going to do recounts in this election no matter what. They signed Whitmer signed an executive order that says we will not do recounts. Well, why would you need to sign something like that unless you were going to poll over something really fishy that people were going to want to demand a recount?
Right.
Well, like, you have dead voters. You're not going to do a recount. It's like, and what actually pisses me off so much, PJ, is they do it because the Republican parties are wusses.
That's exactly what it is.
The Democratic machine, at this point, they can say and do whatever they want, and it's almost like a challenge. Like, yeah, we're cheating. Yeah, we have dead people voting. Yeah, we're not going to do recounts, and what are you going to do about it? And it's just this almost just like dangling in front of conservatives' faces, like, we do what we want. We have the machine. We control the media. We control the propaganda. Come at us. And it's this infuriating, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of how it comes across, because why would you sign an executive order about not doing a recount? Like, that just blows my brain, unless you're just admitting that you're going to cheat.
It just feels like the corruption is just out in front of us at this point,
right.
And
by the way, I'm not to say that like Republicans are not perfect. And I'm sure there have been cheating on both sides. I'm sure Republicans will do but to this level, it's not been seen before. Right. To this level, it's another kind of what we talked about in the previous elections. Like both were probably cheating.
Well, it's like mafia levels at this point, right? It's like we're not hiding it. We know that but you're not going to do anything about it. And the one time that anybody tried to do anything about it, that also is represented in this film. So I want to talk about that. So I found this article from Medium, and we'll watch the clip about this in just a minute. But this is interesting. It says, I'm going to write this out again. The climactic scene of this film, which came out in 1996, involves a small group of civilians going to a state capitol building so nobody went to January 6th with guns. So let's ignore that part anyway. But with guns to threaten people, halt the vote certification, allege voter fraud, and overturn the election results. This played start to finish for comedy. Gary Busey dresses in camo fatigues and points a rocket launcher at a crowd of reporters. Chris Farley steals a cop's gun and in order to get onto the dais, takes David Spade as a fake hostage, although nobody is really interested in saving Spade's life. Here's the kicker. They're in the right. They're the good guys because it turns out voter fraud was real and actually a massive conspiracy created by the incumbent governor and her aides. When Farley bellows voter fraud from the podium, it's meant to be a triumphal moment leading into a less triumphant moment where the podium tips over. And because of how Farley falls, it looks like he's dry humping the governor, which is a hilarious scene, by the way.
Yes.
But I find this article from Medium so interesting because it's the only article I found that is making the comparison between this and January 6th. But what I don't understand here is that, it's definitely a leftist mindset going on here where it's like, okay, in this movie, we praised it because there was voter fraud, but when it happened in real life, these people are evil. And then he makes all these crazy, I think that a lot of leftists actually believe that this is what January 6th looked like because they haven't actually watched the footage or paid any attention to what really happened that day. But they really think that people went there with rocket launchers and were taking hostages and doing all this crazy stuff. But what's your thoughts on the comparison, though, between this movie and January 6th?
I hadn't made that comparison at all. I think it is interesting how in this movie, when there is voter fraud, it's the just thing to do. The person who wrote the article was well, obviously you would storm the Capitol if you were cheated. That would make sense logically.
Well, I think he's actually saying something else. He's well, this movie's evil because it showed people fighting back against voter fraud and winning and how, because it's post January 6th. So now there's no such thing as voter fraud.
But he said in the article that they were in the right.
Yes.
And so that's it's kind of like he's saying both things. It's they were right. But you're setting a terrible precedence to do this. And I'm I just think it's a really interesting comparison. I don't think I would have, because even then, in this movie, they really didn't storm the Cap. It was just he was just trying to get a hold and make a statement.
I think it was a speech at the governor's mansion or something. Yeah,
right. It wasn't all these people stormed. It was just him. He was just trying to figure out how to get on the microphone, and he invited Gary Busey, I think, as just backup. And
basically.
And we'll talk about the governor trying to take him out in a second, but it wasn't this massive. I don't see the massive comparison in the film when you watch it. I think it's a little bit of a stretch.
It's only a comparison again if you actually believe that people stormed the Capitol with guns and rocket launchers on January 6th. But I got to find this funny because this guy, and I'm a host of a conspiracy podcast. This guy's conspiracy theory is more unhinged than anything I've ever wrote in the next part. So check this out. He says, basically, he goes on to say, Trump watched Black Sheep and got the idea for January 6th from this movie. He's look, this all to say that Trump absolutely knows who Chris Farley is and absolutely has seen every Lorne Michaels produced film. And in January of this year, some neuron misfired in his brain and he got the idea to do a Black Sheep. And now this hastily produced film, a film so bad it made Chris Farley start using again, had 6 months of lasting consequences for American democracy, and it's not over. I find this so funny. It's written in 2021, obviously. But he's just he has this theory that Trump literally watched Black Sheep and,
what we should do?
And got the idea to do a January 6th. Which also is people who
January 6th. It's going to be awesome. We're going to Chris Farley this. they're not going to see it coming. They won't see it coming. I'm telling you, they won't see it coming. Like, it's just like, what?
It's also funny because, again, it has to come from people who don't actually know what happened, that he was giving a speech like miles away and then left and then tweeted like, hey, don't do this. Like, there's the connecting Donald Trump to January 6th is
like, there's videos of Nancy Pelosi saying that she had to figure out how to frame this. Like, and there's a video of her.
Why did Nancy Pelosi hire a film crew to be in the Capitol that day to document all the stuff that happened?
And have a film crew in her car as she was like leaving and not taking Donald Trump's call. Like, there's a video of her talking about it and like denying it and telling people.
Why were there obvious feds going around starting we need to storm the Capitol, we need to storm the Capitol. And then those guys who said that on film multiple times, we need to storm the we need to storm the Capitol, none of those guys got arrested.
Yeah, and there's videos of people being handcuffed and then taken to side rooms and being let go. So it's just wild. I mean,
I said back at the time, I had a lot of friends who were like, are you going to go to this January 6th rally? And I'm like, dude, it's a setup. I said literally to my friends back then, I was like, something bad is going to happen. I don't think you should go. I don't know why I thought that, but it felt like a setup.
On Twitter just destroy me for even... You're one of those weak-brained, white-wing, fascists that believe this was a setup and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, bro, like, and like literally friends that like have stopped following me and blocked me and all this stuff. And I'm like, I just try to follow what's logical. And the conservatives as a whole, we are not marked as a party that burn things and riot and destroy. That is not how we deal with things. Now, like, we're not Antifa, we're not BLM. So that's not something we've normally done.
I was going to say, if you compare January 6th to just a single day in the summer of 2020
it's not comparable.
Kenosha, for example.
Yeah, or Washington or whatever.
Or Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even Detroit had burning cars. So I'm like...
I was almost caught up in one of the really bad BLM riots in Detroit. I was driving truck down there, and I almost got ran off the road by a crazy bunch of people. There's like literally 500 cop cars. People were getting tear gassed. It was really bad, dude. I was like almost caught up in that.
Yeah, but but we're the ones that this is the worst day in human history, And sure, we're there. Like, there are videos of like cops, tear gassing people. I mean, It wasn't pretty. Like, I'm not one of those people that say like, oh, it was a peaceful,
No, of course, there was definitely like bad actors there. But for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure. But like there is going to be in any mob.
Correct. Yeah. So there were things that I'm like, they shouldn't have happened. But at the same time, it's like, it was 100%, in my opinion, some sort of setup. And then you have people that were peacefully walking through the Capitol.
Who spent time in essentially black site prisons. Yeah.
Guys, they had walk-off ropes.
Yeah.
There were ropes to direct them. Yeah. Is that not weird? But anyway, people
there said that they could not leave the Capitol grounds that day without going through the building because they were being blocked off from leaving any other way. So a lot of people say they were funneled through so that way they could get that photo op of, look, they stormed the Capitol. It just seems like at this point, it seems pretty obvious it was a setup. Obviously, if you rile up a bunch of people, even if you've set them up, some people are going to break windows and go crazy and stuff like that.
Sure, and there should be punishments for that. Like
there should be, but I still think it was a setup.
Absolutely. If you attacked cops and you did things that you shouldn't have, absolutely there should be punishment for that.
Right.
But then just to try to ping people's cell phones that were just in the vicinity and still are going, like the FBI and CIA are still going after people that were in the vicinity.
Right. Yeah, there was people that spent time in jail that were never on the Capitol grounds. They were just in Washington and had said the wrong things on Twitter.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is interesting.
Pretty crazy. So I want to go through this scene because you pointed out something else that happened this year with Trump that I didn't even think of, didn't even remember. Yeah. And it's a couple of minutes, but I think it's good. So just tell me at any point if you want me to pause, we can comment on it. But this is kind of the pivotal scene. This is where they have the voter registration rolls. He's gone. He doesn't know how to get in front of the mic. So he basically takes Mike takes Steve hostage, gets up on the podium. He looks like a crazy madman, but he's got a point, right? So here's that scene.
This is serious business. Now, we've all been screwed by Governor Tracy. And now I'm gonna screw her. I mean, I have evidence here that you need to know about now before it's too late.
Mike, what the hell are you doing here?
Oh, man. Hey,
Isn't that Steve Dodge?
Yes, sir.
Al, man, I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna prove you won the election.
Mike, put the gun down. There's other ways to handle this.
No, man, Al, there's no other way. You gotta believe me.
I believe you. I believe you. I don't want you to get hurt.
Look, I know this looks bad. Al, man, I'm not a screw up on this one. I've got proof this time. Real proof.
Yeah, but look, the election's over. It's history. Like you're gonna be if you don't put that gun down. I mean it.
Sorry, I want to we're almost to the part that we want to talk about, but that line made me think, during this time, the reason that no one's ever going to trust 2020, whether it was legit or not, is for that reason alone, is that people had all kinds of proof and they were not allowed to be seen in court. And I just want to point that out. Like, if you really wanted to quiet down the conspiracy theorists and the crazy people, maybe actually litigating the thing would have, anyway.
Al, please. You love me like a brother. You gotta back me up on this.
All right, Mike. I'll back you up. What do you want me to do?
Just let me explain to these people what happened. Ow! Ow!
All right, man. Let's talk about this. I didn't even think about this, but literally, if the idea is that he's the stand-in for Trump, that Mike Donnelly is the stand-in for Trump, you've got a sniper at a close range, miss by a millimeter, and like go right by his ear. That's kind of wild, is it not?
This was the moment. The voter fraud was weird, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of ironic that they did this. And then this scene happened. I texted you right away. I was like, PJ, this is, first of all, Chris kind of has a similar build and hair to Trump. And
it does. Yeah, the hair is very similar.
But then I'm just like, sniper, visible by the people. That's the funniest part, because the gun is behind, the shot comes from behind him.
Yeah.
And so this gunner should not have been there at all, and he's allowed to be there, and it's a setup by the person who won, the governor. She wanted this to have. She's like, take him out because he's too dangerous. And so then the craziest thing is the shot goes right by him and almost hits him in the ear.
Yeah,
and I'm just like, that is the most. Because when you pile that together with the voter fraud, you pile that together with that people voting, and then you have this guy that's speaking at a rally.
Right.
Uncovering truths and saying that cheating happened. Well, the only thing that the side that cheated has to do is they have to kill him.
The only thing that would have made it more perfectly is if he had said, I have a chart here, and then turned to look at the chart. Like, that's the only thing that could have been like more on point.
But it was like he turned his head.
Yep.
He turned his head. Obviously the mirror, messed with the sniper. But it was just one of those things that I'm like, they're just taking out the guy that's telling truth. And it was just such a wild stretch of scenes in this short period of row, and there's prophetic. I mean, it was just wild to me.
And that's I want to get into maybe a little bit of crazy territory for a minute, but it's like, I know often when we look at movies, there's certain events that seems like they're preparing the public, and I think this absolutely happens with movies. I think there's multiple things that are going on. We know that the CIA is deeply involved in Hollywood. And by the time this comes out, you guys will have seen the episode I did about Wag the Dog, which really goes into that stuff. And I think with that, sometimes what we're seeing is, here's an idea, we put it out there, and then you get used to the idea. So when it happens, you're not, the public doesn't go mad. Like, that's revelation of the method, whatever, right? That's preparing the public. I also think, and have kind of proven that in the past, the CIA has used Hollywood writers to say, well, what would happen, workshop this idea, and if it looks good on film, we might actually try to pull that off in real life. But this is a weirder one. And I have to ask the question here, are there events that are so monumental in history that the idea of them just echoes forward and backward through time? Is the idea that basically January 6th, the Trump assassination attempt, all of that is such a memorable thing that people were sensing it, before it even happened. I know it's kind of a time not being a linear thing concept, but I love talking about that type of stuff. I don't know if you're into talking about that kind of stuff at all, but
I mean, I'm just not familiar with the line of thinking as much. I mean, do I think, I'll use the term if we talk about propaganda, there's propaganda that prepares you for things. We were talking about it last night with some friends, and they asked the question of growing up, it was asked to an older guy, did you see the LGBTQ agenda coming on as strong as it did. And he was like, well, all you had to do was watch Friends in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like all you had to do is watch these certain shows that back in the 90s, it was taboo. You couldn't be in an openly gay relationship without being judged. You couldn't marry, you couldn't be gay and get married. But then in these shows, they were, you had a lesbian couple and Friends. And then you had Chandler's dad who was trans. And it was back before it was kosher. But then they threw these things in comedy where they were slowly preparing the public for what they were trying to do. And they used movies to make it normalized. So for me, I would say I would go as far to believe that, where they would use movies and media to try to normalize things they're trying to push that are currently not okay. Whether it's to the level of something this far ahead of time, I don't know. I mean, that would be a
the
big
coincidence is just uncanny is my point. Like
it is.
It's like in my mind, there's nothing in this that makes me think they were preparing the public for a January 6th,
Right.
But it's still weird. And even if it's just coincidence, it's definitely a fun one to go back and look at and be like, wow, like how did that, like
the weird thing to me,
how's that so close to reality?
Like Trump and the way of like Trump hair, like it is a very like interesting, just and right by the ear. It is just a very unique situation. And that's why to me, I'm like, I don't know why more people aren't talking about this movie, because there's so much about elections and things we've seen in this film. And it's almost like The Simpsons.
But you're right, though, because like every time something happens, like some autistic person on the internet is like, oh, I saw a movie that no one's ever heard of. And like that clip gets shared on Instagram a billion times. Like this has never been outside that Medium article and then you watching it and like kind of making these connections and bring it up to me. I couldn't find anything talking about these connections and parallels at all.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, and to me, it's such a stark. I mean, it's very obvious.
Yeah.
Like this is a very clear, weird movie prophetic thing that I'm like, I just don't know why. But I mean, let's also keep in mind that they're trying to keep this Trump assassination under the rug anyway. So even if people are promoting this kind of stuff, probably all algorithms are going to not let it get out, because
that's
anything regarding, I mean, you don't even hear about it. Dude, like, this was just a couple months ago. You don't even hear about it. The fact that he was literally a millimeter away from dying, and you don't hear about it at all.
Yeah, I mean, the Ryan Ruth story, the second Trump assassination attempt, that one was on, in the public consciousness for like 12 seconds.
Yeah, literally like 30 minutes. And then what's wild is they've gone back to calling him Hitler again. They've gone back to, like, they went through this stage right after it happened.
There was a Kamala Harris tweet this week that was basically like, if Trump's elected, nothing will be able to stop his agenda.
Right. No, she did a press conference outside of like her mansion or whatever. Of the whole thing was just to call him Hitler.
Yeah.
Like, because of this anonymous source that's Donald Trump said he wants generals like Hitler had. There's some sort of that's still not proven, that she did a whole speech on this thing that was not proven, calling him Hitler.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
it's like, well, there was, after the Ryan Ruth assassination attempt, I was watching, I think it was MSNBC. It was either that or ABC. It doesn't matter. And they asked the question, which everybody else said, which is what you're insinuating, which is, hey, do you think maybe saying that this man is Hitler and that the only, like, if he's elected, everything's done and his agenda will be this bad and there's only one way to stop him, possibly, wink, wink, not, like basically saying stop him at all costs, like, and literally saying that at times is maybe what led to the assassination attempt. So I thought they were asking that question on MSNBC, and they said, do you think that the political rhetoric is leading to violence? And the guest said, yes, I think Donald Trump's political rhetoric is leading to violence, and everybody feels unsafe because of his political rhetoric. And I was like, he was just shot at like twice. Well, he was shot at once, almost shot at again. And it's like, in their minds, it's still, okay, yes, people are actively trying to kill Donald Trump right now. Maybe it's because we're calling him Hitler. But the real threat is that Donald Trump was mean to Rosie O'Donnell on Twitter one time, and therefore he's going to cause political violence. And it's like, but it's not happening, though. Like, what is happening is you're calling the guy Hitler and people are shooting at him. Like, that is what is actually happening. The cognitive dissonance is just wild to me, I guess.
Well, it's weird how many people believe it, because literally, bro, I've been called a fascist. A new term is Christo-fascist.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. Christo-fascist.
I've been called it 7 times on Twitter in the past 48 hours.
Nice.
And like, there's this thread. I commented on Russell Brand, his thing. And there's this thread of people just like, they have no idea who I am. But I said, I've been called a Christo-fascist just because I'm a Christian and a conservative. And literally, bro, out, like there's 50 comments on it being like, yeah, if the shoe fits, obviously, do you believe that you need more God in this nation, then obviously you're fascist. I mean, literally I have 50 comments just calling me that because I believe in the Lord and because I'm a conservative. People don't know me. They haven't listened to my content. They haven't actually taken any time to know what I actually believe about things. But just because I've put myself in the conservative camp and the Christian camp, they want me dead, legitimately. They're like, you are a fascist. You're an evil person.
Just because you agree with both sides of the political aisle going back, hundreds of years, essentially on the basic things, that makes you a Christo-fascist. It's kind of wild.
It is wild. It's been a wild. But my point to saying that is those are the same people that are believing that they can call people Hitler, they can call people Christian, but it's us that are inciting the violence. And it's the same people that will spew this type of things, like a Kamala Harris will keep calling Trump a fascist, keep calling him Hitler.
Well, it's just like, it's just like burning down a Nike store and then saying, isn't the right so violent? Like that's exactly what we've seen for years. It's gaslighting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Dillon, for coming on this show, for talking about this movie with me. This was a lot of fun. This is going to come out on Election Day, so I thought I would try to end this with, do you have any predictions for what happens 2024 election? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny. It was just asked to me on a live stream yesterday, and then I was on another, I think Trump has the votes. I think Trump is going to, I don't think it's going to actually necessarily be close, but I'm not convinced Trump is going to be the one standing in there on Election Day. I think the left has, like we've talked about, they will do anything in their power to keep Trump from getting in office. I think Trump needs to have the best security in the world for the next 2 weeks. I think that he needs to be very careful where he goes and who he talks to and make sure that everything's vetted. I also think that the cheating and the mail-in ballots, the illegal immigrants, like a lot of these things that Elon Musk has touched on, people have talked on, I think those are real problems. And I just think that people just need to go out and vote. And you can't cheat the mass. So if the mass moves in a massive direction, no amount of cheating is going to keep Trump out of office. But if it's close and people are like, oh, I'm not going to, I think there's a very good chance through all these different methods we talked about that they've used in the past, they're like not doing recounts. And I think there's a very good chance that Trump gets cheated out of it.
Yeah, I'll say this, and I said the same prediction before 2020, so it's not groundbreaking, but I think whoever wins, nobody trusts it. I think we're just at that point in the political system that until something changes, especially with these crazy laws, these unconstitutional laws that happened in 2020, that they're just like, oh yeah, well, too bad, too late now. Things like what Gretchen Whitmer's doing, things like Jocelyn Benson's doing. I think, I personally still kind of think Trump's going to win. I know that there's maybe not even a lot of reason for me to believe that because of all the voter fraud. We haven't changed anything with those things.
Right.
I'll just say this. I predict Trump wins, and I predict that this will be my crazy prediction. Trump wins, and then all of a sudden, voter fraud is a thing again, according to the mainstream news, and you can't trust the voting system, and it's okay. And it's like 2016 was voter fraud, 2020 was perfect, nothing bad happened. It's the only free and fair election we've ever had, and you'll be banned on YouTube for saying it. And then in 2024, you'll be able to talk about voter fraud again. Like that's my prediction. Is we'll actually see that like return to voter fraud's real. Voter fraud's a big deal, and it's always the right doing it. And Donald Trump couldn't have possibly won, even though Kamala Harris is the least liked person to ever run for office in any country in history ever.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's the honest truth. Like literally,
that's not even a crazy prediction.
Like if you're watching this, you voted for Kamala Harris. I at least like just be honest that you don't like her. Like you can say you voted for her, but nobody likes her. Nobody actually wants her to be president. No. They might not want Trump to be president, but they don't want her to be either. Like that's my belief on it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to follow up with my crazy prediction, if Trump gets elected, we will have riots. We will have massive destruction.
We'll see a real January 6th that's like actually really bad.
If Kamala gets elected, I think it is going to be the straw that breaks the camel back for the Republican Party to start actually growing a pair of balls. And I think that if Kamala gets elected, you're going to see a massive shift in the conservative movement. More outgoing speaking, more actionable items, electing people that are going to do something. And I think that if Kamala gets elected, you're going to see a massive change in the Republican Party, that they're going to be like, okay, we're done. And I think that is just going to be the final straw. And I think Republicans are going to stop being wuss cakes and actually start doing something. So that's my dual prediction. I really do believe that if Trump gets elected, I think it could be really bad. But at the same time, I think that's just what we need to do. And it will just be so ironic. PJ, it's gonna be so ironic for when they riot and they burn things that they're fine doing it, and they're still going to say January 6th.
That's the way it always is. That's why
and
it annoys me so much that Republicans are like, okay, yeah, we're sorry. And it's like, we just got to stop apologizing.
That's why I love the Babylon Bee. And they just made a movie. I'm going to give him a shout out. I'm having Kyle Mann on my show soon.
Awesome. Yeah.
We just need to schedule it. They made a funny movie about the January 6th, the worst day in human history or whatever. And it's just one of those things.
I still have to watch it.
Bad things did happen, but the inconsistencies are laughable. And so I just think, this is election season. I'm ready for it to be done. I'm ready for us just to move on to the next stage. And just like I'll leave you with this, just like 2016, the day that Trump got elected, they were already starting to try to impeach him. This isn't over. Trump gets elected. It's not fairy tale. Like, it's going to be more battles. And it takes all conservatives to actually start speaking, stepping up, and just speaking truth and love. I mean, be kind, but we're done with this whole, we're just living in our shell, not willing to say that I support conservative values. That's done. We are done with that style of thing. And so I just be prepared for just another 4 years, I think, of crazy drama either way. Even if Trump's not asking for it, it's going to be handed to him because they hate him so much. So
yeah, absolutely, man. All right. Well, I enjoyed this. And again, if you're watching this, it's election day, I'm sure, when this comes out. So if the election stuff is too crazy for you, you should just go watch Black Sheep. It's fun. It's not his best movie. It's lighthearted fun. Lighthearted watch. Dillon, where can people find you, man?
Yeah, go to YouTube, Dillon England on YouTube, Dillon England on Rumble now.
Yeah, welcome to Rumble, man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're on Rumble. Follow my Twitter if you want to see my Christo-fascist tweets, apparently. Go follow me on Twitter, at Dillon England. And obviously follow PJ. PJ's the best. Appreciate you, bro. This was a blast.
Yeah, it was fun, man. I'll have to have you back sometime. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you for being here, Dillon. Thank you for watching, guys. Have a free and fair election, or whatever you call a free and fair election. And we will see you next time. Until then, keep it real.